Hi, I'm your host Jürgen Strauss from InnovaBuzz, and I'm really excited to welcome to the InnovaBuzz podcast today from Oxford in the UK, Dr Ruth Allan, who's a multiple founder and CEO of various businesses. She's an executive and family coach, a certified brain health professional as well as trainer, a motivational speaker, and also host of her own podcast, Brain Health: Unchaining Your Pain. Welcome to the InnovaBuzz podcast, Ruth. It's a real privilege to have you here as my guest.
Oh, thank you, Jürgen. It's such a pleasure to be on your podcast, and I know we had so much fun connecting through Tom, so it's exciting to be here today. Thank you.
Yes, Tom Ruich did connect us. He was our guest on episode 483 of the InnovaBuzz podcast, so big hello to Tom. Now, Ruth, I know you're passionate about helping individuals and helping them reconnect with their best selves, which is something that I really like the way you've expressed that, and also winning back their energy, time, and passion around what they love doing and what they and those reconnecting with those they love as well by unchaining, unlocking, and unleashing their full potential. And I know you work a lot in the area of brain health, so I'm really excited to dig into that some more. Now, before we unpack a lot of that, what's the impact you're hoping to leave in the world today?
So from today, I want to inspire people to really take action and to know that they are not stuck with the brain they have, but they have the power to make it better, and they have the power to take charge of their well-being, be the boss. And that's really the impact I want to leave in the future, which is to inspire over 10 million people to really empower them to take charge of their well-being and be the boss through the Wellbeing Warrior Academy that I founded, and to do that from a global perspective. So I'm really excited about that.
That's fantastic. Well, we'll have to learn more about that Wellbeing Warrior Academy then from you. Tell us more about that.
So it's an academy that is for people who feel that they're stuck in a rut and they've tried everything, or they're not getting the right support from the traditional routes, such as traditional medicine, and they feel that they need support to optimise their unique brain or to really improve their brain and whole body health. So we take a look at your whole body health, but through the lens of brain health. Through various different programs, and those programs range from young children. So we do programs for kids. It's the Wellbeing Warrior belt system. So we're starting off with a yellow belt, and they work through the belt system to become wellbeing warriors. And then we have programs for teenagers to learn about their brain. That's Brain Thrive by 25. And then programs for adults as well, and then all the way through to retirement, which is looking at brain fit for work and life, and then memory rescue, which is another one. And then the wrapper around that is coaching for people on a one-to-one or a group level, as well as support for trauma recovery.
Yeah, I love it. Lots of different programs. One of the things you mentioned there, and I think that's a really good one to explore. You talked about a holistic approach to brain health, and certainly we have to remember that the brain basically is an organ that controls everything that happens in our body, right? I mean, our heart wouldn't beat if the brain wasn't doing something to keep it beating. We wouldn't be breathing because we don't think about our heart beating. We're not consciously saying, heart, keep beating, right? Or we're not consciously saying, keep breathing. The brain sort of does that for us completely in the background. And if our brain's not healthy, then it impacts on a lot of different things. Digestion is another one. Talk to us a little bit more, because I think you have a philosophy that there's brain health, which is kind of an overarching thing over the top of what's talked about a lot these days, which is mental health. And it's great that we're talking a lot about mental health, because I think in the past that was something that was a taboo subject with pretty devastating consequences. But I think the idea of a holistic approach is very consistent with my philosophy around all of medicine, which is that traditional medicine kind of treats symptoms, whereas a more holistic approach looks at, well, what are underlying causes, and even takes that further to what can we do proactively to maintain a healthy system. So talk to us a little bit about that in the context of brain health.
Yeah, so that's absolutely right. So we take an integrated approach, so it's all along the lines of functional medicine approach, but through the lens of coaching, to look at how the system of the person is functioning, but diving in through the lens of the brain, because like you mentioned, our brain runs everything, and if our brain works right, then we tend to work right as well. And when we take the time to look at the whole system, we don't just look at the symptoms, but we are able to dive deep and start to uncover the root cause of the symptoms. And traditionally, from a brain perspective, psychiatry has looked at the brain as a separate entity to the rest of the body. And it's the only practice that doesn't image the organ that it treats, which is a huge mistake, because if we think about a heart and we go to a heart specialist, as my daughter did when she was about 18 months old, they don't talk to you about you've got a beats per minute issue. They look at your heart, they make sure it's functioning properly, they look at where the blood flow is going in your heart, they look at whether the valves are working properly, and so on. And the conversation is super simple with the child, because you talk to them about their organ. The difference with brain health in the way that we've approached it traditionally is it's come from a very the approach has been very archaic and not really updated from the early 19th century, where people have focused on the mental health aspect. And obviously the word mental has negative connotations associated with it. And they've been focusing on the person being at fault. So, in the past, the person would have been called mental and have a mental health problem, which is often what we still call it today. And the label is focused on the person being the problem and the symptoms associated with the person, rather than looking at the organ that's in trouble, which is the brain. And it's often not just the brain that's in trouble, it's often many systems throughout our body that are in trouble. And the conversation is much harder from a mental health perspective, because we're labelling people, and people feel shamed by the terminology that's used, the language that's used around the symptoms, rather than taking the time to look at the brain and look beyond just the mental health piece, because the brain, we have everything from mental health struggles to Alzheimer's disease and a whole heap of brain struggles in between, and look under the bonnet and seek to uncover what is at the root cause of the trouble of the engine of life, which is your brain.
Yeah.
So that's really the approach that we take. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, of course, your background is in imaging science, and there's lots of fascinating studies coming up all the time. I keep finding bits and pieces there where they've done imaging of the brain and looked at how does the brain, or which areas of the brain, respond to certain stimuli in life. So, for example, if we're learning something new and we're having a struggle with learning it because it is new and because it is a challenge, what parts of the brain light up, and then working out how does that impact on different learning styles. It's absolutely fascinating. So I think what you've pointed out there in terms of the science that we have available these days to do imaging, and of course I know, because I've been in this situation, if you bang your head very hard and there's a suspicion in the hospitals that you've suffered some brain damage or concussion, they will do the imaging to see. It's not, that doesn't get attributed to, well, it's your fault. You're a bad person because you've got potentially brain damage because of that physical trauma that happened to you. They actually do that. Yeah. So,
and that's a really important point, actually, because head trauma is often goes undiagnosed in the context of a brain struggle. So you can, there's cases here in the UK with regards to rugby players who are suing the rugby union because they have experienced cognitive decline and early onset of Alzheimer's disease as a result of repetitive knocks to their head, which cumulatively adds up in the same way as stress stacks. So does head trauma. So it's such an important topic, understanding the impact that a knock can have. It's not just the one knock that can cause struggles, but it's multiple knocks that stack that can have a long-term effect on people.
Yeah, and there's a lot of conversation here in Australia around that as well, in the area of rugby and also other contact sports where the same conversation is happening.
Anything.
Yeah. All right. The one of the things I'm curious about, there's a lot of talk, particularly in entrepreneurial circles, about mindset, the entrepreneur's mindset, and this idea of we can dial in our mindset to be successful. How does mindset, the concept of mindset, how do you see that? How does that fit in with brain health, and where do the two intersect?
So I like to think of the brain as there's kind of two systems. You have your hardware, which is the connections that you have physically inside your mind, and then you have the software, and the software is your mindset. So we have the power to shape both, and one influence the other, unusually, compared to a computer. And also the surroundings influence our hardware and software. And so when we're looking at brain health, we have to look at both of those aspects. We have to look at what type of brain has an individual been born with, and how has that brain evolved over time as a consequence of interventions or traumas that have happened in a person's life. And what is the person telling themselves? How are they feeling? So if we break it down into 4 quadrants of well-being, we look at their emotional well-being, so the feelings that they have, their physical well-being, what they're actually doing, the mental well-being, how they're thinking, and their spiritual well-being is how they connect with themselves, their core values and beliefs, and how they connect with others, and how they connect with the wider world, their sense of purpose, meaning, and what they're passionate about in life. So mindset is really important in the context of shaping our brain. And it's when we think about it from an entrepreneurial perspective, it's kind of like it can be the make or break of people who want to be entrepreneurs, as to whether they have a fixed mindset or a growth mindset, and how they capitalise on the attributes that they have. And Daniel Mangano, is one of my guests on my show, talks about this. He has Asperger's, and we often think as Asperger's as a mental health condition, and actually it's a gift. And we need to appreciate the gifts that we get given in life, and society needs to appreciate the gifts that people have given and accommodate the gifts, so that people can thrive rather than survive. And he was able to do that. He was able to really understand the power he has inside his mind. And yes, he has if we think about everybody has a kind of car we're all born with a car type, and that car type depends on the engine, it depends on the bodywork, it depends on on what you've been fitted with, and the engine is your brain. So people with Asperger's typically have a racing car, so they love to be on a racetrack, they like things to be in the same lane, and that's great, because a racing car is absolutely useless on an open road or a dirt track, because that's not what it's designed to do. So when you think about being an entrepreneur, it's about focusing on what skills do you bring to the table that are unique to you, and how can you leverage those skills to get the best out of you, and also to really build your business and grow your business. And that might be that some people are not very good at planning, so you get somebody into your business who can do the planning. So many entrepreneurs are ADD, and so they're very good at being creative, have hugely creative minds, but when it comes to actually focusing on delivering against a plan and not being distracted, that can be really difficult.
Yeah. So
it's really taking the time to understand your brain type and leveraging the skills that you possess inside your mind, and unlocking the secrets to that greater mental clarity that we need. So we're not our own worst enemy when it comes to our mindset. We're not holding ourselves back.
Yeah, I love the car analogy, the racing car versus the four-wheel drive designed for the off the road, and then the town car designed for stop-start all the time in traffic.
Absolutely. Yeah. And we're all different, we all we might be put in a collection of a type of car, but ultimately it depends on who the driver is as to how that car performs, and every engine is different, because every single brain, it's a unique brain print. Every one of us has a different brain. No one brain is the same. And so we have to tweak that engine. We have to learn how to optimize it. We have to learn how to get the best performance out of it. And that's what I spend my time doing.
Wonderful. I think there's another important point there is with each of us having different brains, and I know the education system really struggles with this, and that's we all have different approaches to learning or different learning styles, and yet in the education system it's all kind of regimented. Here's the standard learning style, and if you don't learn like that, you're lost, and people are then written off as having difficulties in inverted commas, and yet it's just the system imposing a learning style on them that's not suited to the way they learn.
Absolutely, and it can be hugely detrimental to people who have ADD is classic, because they have a difficulty in paying attention, and so it's really important. One of the big things that has not helped kids with ADD is the fact that they don't have the exercise time to allow their brains to calm down. So exercise is incredibly helpful, and when the schools change the curriculum and reduce exercise, that can have a huge detrimental impact on brain function for many different brain types, actually. So that's really important too, is looking at the curriculum and the balance of curriculum. But the other thing that has really affected kids over the last sort of 50 years is the junk that the food industry have introduced into our diets, which has massively increased the number of children who have ADD-like tendencies. It's increased a vast number of symptoms that kids weren't previously experiencing from allergy perspective. So we, there's so many aspects of that children are under threat from that perhaps we weren't under threat from 50 years ago, and it's a battle, which is why it's all about being a warrior, because we are at battle for the health of our well-being. We really are, and we get, there's often information that's misleading, and you can't be an expert. You can't expect a parent to be an expert at everything. They rely on institutions. That's right, including government, giving them the right information. And if governments have their, are influenced by industry that's focused on making money rather than actually helping people to be well, then we have a serious problem, which is what we do, unfortunately.
Yes, I remember for many years I was a leader in a 10-day bike ride that took a bunch of school kids out for this bike ride in 10 days. And I remember the first few years when I did this and the groups that I was leading, I was just shocked at how many kids were on Ritalin for ADD.
Oh, yeah.
And I thought, well, how's that going to help? And over the course of those 10 days with those kids, and I didn't know what I was doing. I was just kind of treating each kid as an individual and getting a sense of, well, okay, how can I motivate them? Because obviously on that bike ride, we were doing some fairly serious physical exercise, and there was a lot of, I can't do this, I can't get up that hill, I'm going to walk, or I'm just going to sit on the side of the road here because I can't do this anymore. There was a lot of that happening. And I, as someone that had the responsibility of getting these kids from the start point of the day to our campsite for the evening and getting them there safely and hopefully giving them a pleasant experience, as pleasant as it could be, but most importantly to me, giving them a sense of achievement at the end of the day. I was just sort of focused on that, and I didn't realise a lot of what I've learnt in the meantime about brain health and mindset and so on. But I was always amazed that at the end of those 10 days, the transformations that those kids went through, and many of them, in fact, forgot to take their medicine during that time, and it wasn't an issue. And I thought, well, there's clearly something wrong here with the way these kids are being treated in terms of the medical treatment.
And I think it's, I'm not saying medicine is not appropriate. I think it is appropriate, but often it's the right first resort rather than the last resort. So I think it's too easy to prescribe and forget nowadays, rather than take the time and spend the time with the patient to understand their history, to understand the root cause, when the symptoms started, understand the history around the start of those symptoms, and to really take the time to do the detective work. And unfortunately, we've got ourselves in a position in today's world where that time isn't allocated to the professionals to be able to do that detective work, because the system is broken, and we have this situation where it's become a prescribe and forget, come and see me, in 6 months, and that's not the way forward. That's not empowering children to take charge of their well-being. That's taking their power away from them. And we're in a world where it's a digital world. Kids want to be informed. They want to know the truth. They will go searching for the truth. And it's our responsibility as adults to give them the truth, to tell them the truth, to tell them the facts, and to make those facts available to them in a digestible way, for not only the kids but for the parents too, so that they can make more informed decisions. And at the moment, that information isn't available in a way that is digestible necessarily all the time, for kids to take charge of their well-being. And I have a 3.5-year-old daughter, and we talk about the impact of sugar on her health. It's a simple conversation. Sugar is not healthy for you. Sugar is addictive as cocaine, if not more addictive. They've shown in a lab study with rats. it's in everything. It's in everything to do with children's food. It's not a healthy. It's not a food that is good for you. It is really bad for you in so many ways. It increases inflammation. So I can have an easy conversation with my daughter about sugar, and so we don't want to eat much of it because it's not good for us. It hurts us. So we minimise sugar consumption, and she gets it. So she's all right with it. She's 3.5, but she understands. She doesn't complain. She's like, I don't want to feed my bad bugs in my gut, which is what sugar does. I want to feed the good bugs, which are the soldiers in my gut. I want to make them well. So we focus on the foods that feed the good bugs, the soldiers, and eliminate the foods that feed the bad bugs. And those sorts of conversations need to be had with children. It's really organisations that have the power to make huge changes to the well-being of the nation.
Yeah, well, sugar has just skyrocketed through my lifetime in terms of being in everything and the promotion that's around products that are loaded up with sugar. I know I remember when I was getting to the stage maybe 15, 20 years ago now where I thought I've gotten to a really unhealthy weight. I was feeling unhappy with myself. I need to do something. And I started doing the work of learning because I had this philosophy that the diet spiral up and down is not really good for you either. So what can I do to change my food style? And I did a lot of research and I was astounded. One of the things that I saw was the fizzy drinks that you can buy, and I won't name any brands because I think they're all pretty similar, and it showed this image of how much sugar was in that, and I thought, I can't believe you could actually dissolve that much sugar in a glass of water, which effectively this drink was.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's a really, good point, but also sweeteners are just as bad. So we've, companies have switched from sugar to sweeteners, but actually sweeteners are just as bad, if not worse, in some instances because they are sweeter than sugar, and it tricks your brain into thinking it's having sugar. So it still produces the same insulin response and the spike that you would have had if you had sugar anyway. So they're as bad as each other in essence. And the best thing to give your kids from a drinking perspective is water.
Yes.
And flavour it with some fruit. Put some fruit in it, and flavour it with some fruit. It'll save you a huge amount of money and a lot of dental work.
Exactly. Yeah. All right. Well, I did want to change tack a little bit and explore. You talk about connecting with our best self, and I'd like to explore that a little bit more in terms of how do we, as individuals, achieve this state of what's going on for me. You talked about the 4 pillars before: the emotional well-being, the mindset, the mental health, and the spiritual well-being. How do we connect with ourselves to the point of saying, well, where am I at with all these things, and what's out of kilter, and what do I need to address?
So the way I look at it is our brain runs everything. So it's responsible for how we feel, how we think, how we act, how we connect with ourselves, how we connect with the world around us, how we connect with others, and also our surroundings influence everything. So I like to look at the facts. So facts is as we say, let's look at the facts, which is the 5 pillars of brain health. So the first one, F, is for feelings, is to check in with our emotions. And I'm not talking about the feelings that you want to have. I'm talking about the feelings that you have that are running in the background. So we often don't pay attention to how we feel, or we may actually ignore how we feel And feelings are emotions, and emotions come and go like waves. And when we ignore the wave, it can crash on us, and we go bongo sliding on the wave. If you're familiar with surfing, is you end up being trashed in the wave, or we actually bury it and end up expressing it physically because our mind isn't listening. So it's really important to pay attention to the emotions that are running around in our mind, because our emotions drive our behaviours, and our behaviours create habits, and our habits, build us to who we are and end up being. So that's one. The first one is feelings. Actions is understanding what we're doing. So what behaviours, habits, and activities are either helping us or hurting us. So like we just touched on a few, which is what we're drinking and what we're eating. And then our connection to ourselves. So I've talked about connecting with our emotions, but understanding our values, which is like our moral compass in life. It's kind of like our sixth sense. So this is understanding when we know that something isn't right, but we can't put our finger on it. We can't articulate it. We don't have the words to say what it is, but something is informing us that something isn't right. It's typically because something is off from our core values. So it's listening to your sixth sense, your intuition. And then understanding how we connect with ourselves internally determines how we connect with others externally. So if we don't take the time to love ourselves internally and to appreciate who we are and what we bring to this world, it's much harder to show up as your authentic self, because you're holding back and you're belittling yourself, so we can become our own worst enemy. And you're not having that open connection with other people or with the wider world, because you're spending time disconnecting with you or berating yourself, and we can be our own worst bully to ourselves. So it's taking the time, really taking that time to understand how we're talking to ourselves, which is the fourth pillar, which is thinking. What thoughts are we having? And we have, up to 90,000 thoughts a day, many of them subconsciously. And those thoughts drive our emotions drive our actions. So it's taking the time to listen into our thoughts and understand, okay, what thoughts are running in the background, and turning down the volume of negativity and turning up the volume of positivity, and really taking the time to challenge the negative thoughts, or we call them ants. So we say often people have an ant infestation in their brain because they're spending all of their time saying to themselves, I'm not enough, I'm not good enough, I'm stupid, I'm all of these negative things they'll say to themselves. And it's challenging those ants and getting that little anteater in your head and sucking all those ants out and getting rid of them, so that you've got a lovely. The thoughts that you're listening to are playing a good tune. Yeah,
I love it. Love the ants.
And then finally looking at your surroundings. The surroundings that we live in, the surroundings that we work in, and we know from COVID how important our surroundings are in terms of our mental well-being. Is how that can really impact how we show up in the world. And actually, literally, just taking 5 minutes out in nature can be hugely beneficial to ourselves. Just grounding ourselves in nature and connecting with nature can be really powerful decompression activity to help us get composure and recheck in with ourselves and calm ourselves down. So it's really looking at our surroundings, but not just the surroundings that we're in, but the surroundings that we've been in, and understanding how our history of our surroundings, including the people we surround ourselves in, so we can have toxic environment, including toxic people, how that shapes our how that shapes our brain, because our brain is moulded. Our brain is adaptive. It wants us to survive, so it will do whatever it takes to make us survive. Children are incredibly resilient because their brain is constantly evolving and adapting to make sure that they live. And so it's understanding what history, particularly in our childhood when our brains are developing up to the age of 25 as females and 28 as males, is understanding how is our environment, the people, the teachers we get surrounded with, our peers, our role models, the family unit, how has that shaped our brain development? And is it shaped it in a good way, or is it shaped in a way that we're full of ants? And it's taking that time to understand that, and to really, as you know, you mentioned at the beginning, is to unchain your pain so that you're not being held back like a bungee cord from going forward in life because of something from your past.
Yeah, well, there's so much in that, so much gold in what you've just shared, and I think it sort of gives everyone a really good blueprint for that self-connection and starting to think about what, or become aware of some of those thoughts, as you mentioned. Is it an ant? Should we be getting rid of that one? One of the things I've been doing recently in a group that I'm mentoring as well is pointing out to them when they're saying something which might be just a simple thing like when they're about to present, for example, saying, I'm sorry, I haven't prepared real well for this, or I'm sorry, this is the first time, I'm really nervous. And I point out to them that, hey, don't apologize up front at the beginning of your presentation, because what you're doing unconsciously is telling yourself that this is going to suck. And you're basically setting yourself up for failure by doing that. I said, now, if you're nervous, just channel that energy into doing the best you can.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, you really brought to mind, I went to an event recently in London, and it was a lot of entrepreneurs there, and I went to a stand where there was a CEO of a company, and the first thing she said to me, she handed out a business card and she said, "Oh, I'm really sorry, this is not the latest business card." I said, "Never apologise. I have no idea what the latest one is. You don't have to tell me. It doesn't matter. It's just the fact it's got your contact details on does not matter if it's the latest one or an old version. Just hand it out and be, you know, and connect. Don't apologise on connecting with people. You know, you're an entrepreneur. Just go for it."
That's right. Yeah. And I think that the other one that is really important, and I can relate to this really well, and I think you had a similar experience to me in this regard, is the values conflict one. And when I was in the corporate world, I spent 27 years in the corporate world, and 25 of that I really enjoyed. In the last 2 years, I was terribly unhappy. And ultimately, I left the corporate world. I made the decision to leave. In hindsight now, from what I've learnt now, I realise that there had been a shift in the values of the corporation, and lots of different things that happened very slowly over time, to the point where it became a values conflict for me. And I didn't realise it was a values conflict. All I knew was I was becoming increasingly frustrated and increasingly unhappy, to the point where I just didn't want to go to work anymore. Whereas the previous 25 years, I'd really enjoyed what I was doing, all the different roles. And it's something that now I realise that if you're starting to have those feelings, explore the value side of things, and is that where the issue lies?
Yeah, and it definitely was the same for me. You know, the corporate world that I left, and I worked with huge companies, but it was the last big corporation that I was with. The values that they portrayed in the leaflets were not the values that they displayed in practice, and there was a huge value conflict. You know, I felt like they didn't really care. I felt much more of a number than a person, and you know, you don't consciously notice it until you take that pause factor, and it's really important to do the pause. And the reason it's so important is our brain is so busy that our unconscious mind is the oldest part of our brain. All our autonomic nervous system is deep in our brain system, right by the brain stem. And our fight or flight response is one of the oldest, the reptilian part of our brain. And we don't naturally think when we go into a fight or flight because that's the way we've evolved.
Yeah. Well, often there's no time, right? Because if the saber-toothed tiger jumps out of the bushes at you, you don't have time to think.
Right, we wouldn't have time to think. And actually our thinking part of our brain, which is our human part of our brain, which is the prefrontal cortex, didn't evolve until much later. And so this logical thinking part of our brain, taking the time to reflect and think, do you know, what is it? Get curious. What is it? Is giving your brain that permission to pause and to activate your prefrontal cortex, the really powerful human part of your brain, and take the time to think, what is it that's going, what is really going on here in my mind? And obviously pause, you need to be in a safe space to pause. But pausing and reflecting is really, really important. And in our fast-paced world, we don't necessarily take that time to pause. We ignore those signals. We ignore the values that start to be slowly missing from our world, like you mentioned. And it's not until something catastrophic happens that we have to pause. And then suddenly the curtains start opening and we start seeing what's actually been happening. So it's really important, for people nowadays, especially with the fast-paced world, that we give ourselves that permission to pause. It's so important.
Yeah, excellent. And that's where, I guess, some people practice yoga, some people practice meditation. That's their ways where we can affect that pause.
Absolutely, and there's so many ways. Deep breathing. Breathe in for 4, hold for 4, breathe out for 4. That's box breathing. I do 24/7 breathing, which is breathe in for 2, hold for 4, breathe out for 7. Or just being still and just doing 10 breaths, just 10 calming breaths. Just taking that time to reflect. And journaling is a great one as well, to pause. Is getting your thoughts out of your head and onto paper. And when you do that, you can look at them subjectively. So you're not in your head. You're giving yourself permission to distance yourself from what's going on in your mind. And that allows you to have that piece of reflection as well.
Excellent. All right. Well, this is fascinating. I could go on talking brain health and the brain with you for ages. And I think we've been good in that we haven't gone too far down the deep science route because we've both got a background in science. I think it's a good point now, though, to move on to the buzz, which is our innovation round. It's the same 5 lightning questions I ask every guest, and the idea is you'll give us something that'll inspire the listener to do something awesome as a result today. All set?
I'm ready.
What's the number one thing anyone needs to do to be more innovative?
Don't constrain yourself to societal norms. So never put yourself in the box. So get out of the box. If you don't go in the box, you can easily get out of it. So don't constrain yourself to society. Be free.
Or define your own box, right?
Yeah, literally just don't get in it.
Yeah, that's right. All right. What's the best thing you've done to develop new ideas?
I think the biggest thing for me is to believe in myself. It's so, I know it sounds so basic, but it's so important. So believe you can, and they say you're halfway there. Believe you can. So belief is such an important, and it's part of the 4 steps to taking charge of your well-being is to believe, then overcome, succeed, and soar. So believe in yourself. That's
great. Love that. And one of the core philosophies of NLP, which I'm sort of a big fan of, is the belief that we have everything we need inside of us. And if you take that approach, you can look at dealing with something and you say, well, I don't know how to deal with that. And then I always add the word yet to that. So that kind of almost tells my unconscious mind is I'm going to figure this out because I have what I need inside of me. I just can't see it right now. So I think, that's really great.
Yeah, and it's so important, and I think that yet thing is really key because it's knowing that you can. It's like when we're children and we're learning to walk, we don't give up because we fell over. Because none of us would be walking on this earth, would we? So we just keep going. You just keep practicing, keep trying, keep doing new things. Believe you're going to get there, and you will.
Yeah, and I guess the example of walking is a really good one because we look at all the adults around us that we're surrounded with, all of whom are walking, and we say, well, there must be a way to do this. And yes, I fell down, and yes, I hurt myself this time, so I'm going to cry for a little bit, but then I'm going to get up and give it another shot, and maybe I'll watch what the others are doing.
And it comes back to mindset there. When we're kids, when we're brand new children learning to walk, we don't have a fixed mindset because nobody's told us we can't. Nobody said you can't do this. There's no can't in our vocabulary. So we're constantly with a growth mindset. It's only the environment and the interventions by our carers and the people that we surround ourselves with that influence what we can and can't do and what we choose to listen to. So, keep an open mind. Like I said, never get in the box. Keep an open mind and have a growth mindset like a child would.
Excellent. Love it. All right. Now, I'd like to ask, what's a favourite resource you use most often? And this could be anything. Could be a practice you use or a tool or a software tool or even people.
I think the most favourite thing I use in terms of developing new ideas is a good old pen and a piece of paper. Or a whiteboard. And the reason it's so important is we can get so hung up on technology that it stifles our creativity. And sometimes just clearing the deck and scribbling stuff down and, doing spider diagrams and stuff. When I really need to get creative, I often default to pen and a piece of paper or a big whiteboard because that's where I don't have any, where do I put this, how do I position PowerPoint and all of these things that distract us.
That's right.
From being creative.
Yeah,
so.
Or have to do a search on how do I get this thing in the right area or something like that, which happens to me quite a lot. Yeah,
absolutely, and this is absolutely. So get a good old pen and a piece of paper
or whiteboard. Like there's no limitations on what you can write down or where, other than the size of whatever it is that you're working with. I've kind of
and
I've done the compromise for the technology because I struggle to find these physical things when I've done that, particularly if it's a bit of paper. And so that's the attractiveness of having it digital because I can search for that on my PC. So the compromise I have now is I will sketch out something either on a whiteboard or on paper. I will photograph that and then upload that and tag it with something so I can find it again later.
Yeah, I was just going to say exactly that thing is, often the best thing is to photograph it, so you've got a record and then you can wipe your whiteboard as often as you like.
Yeah. All right. Now, what's the best way to keep a client on track?
So I find regular check-ins. So it's important to not leave it too long. With any project management piece, you can have online systems, but actually looking into the whites of your client's eyes and having those regular check-ins is really important, whether it's group coaching or one-on-one coaching. It's really key that you check in with them because you don't always get the truth when you use online systems. and it's easy for people to just stop using them, or they become too complicated. So it's taking that, I would say, I don't like to leave it more than 2 weeks generally, because people can easily disconnect. But it's really important to have those regular check-ins with people.
Yeah, love it. And I think you touch on something that I'm very passionate about, which is don't abdicate the personal relationships to the technology.
No.
Yeah.
We need it. We're human beings. We're not robots. We need that. We need that physical connection, even if it might be over the ether. But we need to have that communication with each other, whether it's a telephone or I would say the two main medium is telephone or video. But not recorded. It's really important that you take the time to connect with people in a personal way.
Excellent. All right, and finally, the number one thing anyone can do to differentiate themselves.
Be you. Be you, because everyone else is taken. Don't try and be someone else. Just be you. Understand what your strengths are. Understand you at a deep level. Understand what you bring to the table, because no one else in this world is going to have the same experience as you do. Not anyone, not from a history perspective, from a learning perspective. Just be you. Show up as your authentic self, and that's the best way that you can differentiate yourself.
And that ties in very well with our conversation earlier about connecting to ourselves and having that self-confidence in what we bring. Yeah,
absolutely, so important.
Excellent. Well, thanks, Ruth. This has been fabulous. Now, where can people find out more about the work you do, about your academy, listen into your podcast, and maybe even reach out and say thanks for what you've shared today?
Oh, no, you're welcome. So they can connect with me at ruthmaryallan.com, so ALLAN, so A for action, ruthmaryallan.com, or they can look me up on any of the social media platforms. That's Ruth Mary Allan, RuthMaryAllan.
Excellent. All right, and we'll include those links in the show notes, of course, for anyone that might be listening to this and driving or walking the dog, whatever it is, and can't write that down right now. So, Ruth, what action would you like our listener to take out of today's conversation?
So I would love for people to get curious with themselves. So I always like to say to my clients, get curious, not curious. So when you have an emotional reaction to something, don't get angry with yourself about it. It's another emotion. Just get curious. Get curious about the emotion. Get curious about the thought. Get curious about why you're connecting with someone in that way. Just get curious about everything in life, and you'll start to see things from such a different perspective, and you'll start to learn so much more about yourself and other people. Yeah,
I love it. I love taking that approach and saying, I wonder what triggered that emotion or so on. And it does, it kind of puts the spotlight back on what's going on for us when we do that, when we get really curious. Particularly, I think it's easier to be curious about, I wonder why that person did that thing, or I wonder why that flower is blue, or whatever it might be, something that's outside of us. It's possibly a little harder to say, I wonder why I was attracted to that flower. I wonder what makes me feel like I like that flower. So taking the curiosity to that level, I think, can be very powerful.
Absolutely. It's turning the mirror on yourself, isn't it? And it's a much deeper conversation. It's a much deeper conversation.
Yeah.
When you do that.
Excellent. Well, final question for today's conversation. Who else should I bring on this show and why?
Gosh, I had such a big long list, so I'll give you a couple. So, Michael Unbroken. So he's written this amazing book, Think Unbroken. He's an amazing entrepreneur. He's had a tremendously difficult childhood, and he will say things as it is. And he's achieved extraordinary great. You know, there are no holes barred with this gentleman. He's a wonderfully humble human being, so I definitely recommend him. Robert Pardee, who was again on my show, he is another humble human being. He spent his time supporting his wife through a very difficult cancer period, and he had a huge amount of discovery in the process, and he's very entrepreneurial from that perspective. And I mentioned Daniel Mangana, who's hugely successful entrepreneur from London, but lives in the USA. I think he actually lives in Mexico, and he's leveraged the power of his mindset, which is his Asperger's gift, to really help people be phenomenal entrepreneurs. So he's another one. And then finally, in the context of brain health and having hope, I would say Amy Kardashian, who was on my show on episode 4, and she experienced quite a high degree of trauma through the Lebanese war, and she talks about hope, which is having open possibilities every day. And she's a wonderful human being who's seeking to empower humanity through the work that
Excellent.
she does.
Well, we've got a bonus 4 guests, so we'll get you to introduce us to Amy, to Daniel, Robert and Michael,
No
and we'll reach out to them and bring them on the show as well. So thanks so much for sharing your time and your insights so generously. I've really enjoyed our conversation today on brain health. I think we need to do a repeat performance and talk about some of the things that I had on my list that we didn't get to today, and explore this some more. So thanks again. And
absolutely happy to.